camera's on, they'll be able to see you. Okay, there you go. Perfect. Okay, so that's good there. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We know that this is being streamed. They'll be able to see you. Okay, there you go. Perfect. Okay, so that's good there. Let's see here. We know that this is being streamed with our founder community. And so we were just working on a couple of technical issues there at the end. But we are honored to have Mr. Riley Jones joining us for the final technical workshop. But that doesn't mean this is the end. Tomorrow, after all of the pitching happens and there's been judging, then we have another amazing guest from the Maryland Small Business Development Center. So we're so excited to have them close us out with resources that all of our participants and partners can utilize so that they can wrap up everything that they've been working on this week and then take it even further. Because ultimately what we want is to see everyone go further. You've been given some basic skills. So for all of our participants, you've been given some links where you can win some prizes. Please make sure you complete that link so that you can be entered into that drawing to win a prize, and we'll announce that to those particular folks. But not to belabor the hour, what I'd like to do next is to share the bio of our speaker of the hour. And I can't wait. I'm just so excited about him, Mr. Riley Jones. So a native Chicagoan, Mr. Riley Jones IV is a social entrepreneur in the field of education. He is a co-founder of Sector Software, an organization using technology to create and facilitate opportunity pathways for the new economy. This work garnered him recognition as a Forbes 30 under 30 social entrepreneur. That's a big deal, people. He currently serves City Bridge Education as Director of Ventures, supporting entrepreneurial work in the field of education and workforce development. In 2021, he was appointed as Professor of Practice and Robin Richards Donahoe Social Entrepreneur in Residence at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He received his Bachelor of Arts from Columbia University in Political Science, a Master's of Science in Education Entrepreneurship from the University of Pennsylvania, and a JD from New York University School of Law. His board involvement includes being the president of the Black Alumni Council of Columbia University. In his free time, Riley is an accomplished singer, having performed at venues all over the United States. So I'm hoping that once we finally all get in person, maybe Riley will join us and bless us with a song, you know? And Riley, by the way, I'm pretty stellar at karaoke.
Okay, let's do it.
So it might be a challenge. And just to keep it fun, you know, folks, I always tell you, I like to keep it human while we can, because we're all still human, even though robots are on the horizon. But I gotta give a ski fi over here for my brother over here. So he's representing Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. I'm representing Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. So this is just another example of that first family excellence. And so Riley, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to turn off my camera. You can unmute and just let me know if you need anything. And so to our audience, as you are watching, as you are sharing, please make sure you're sharing this. I introduce you to the Riley Jones IV. Thank you, Riley.
Great, thank you so much. I hope you all can hear me. One, Lakeisha, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be able to chat with you all about Startup Essentials. I want to also start by saying that I come to this work as an entrepreneur now, but I was not always an entrepreneur. My background, for the most part, for the longest time, has been in political science and public policy. And honestly, I started as an entrepreneur because I wanted to make a difference, which I think is probably true for many of us who are listening in today. Just to give you some perspective in terms of, I guess, where we'll start and sort of where I hope to end up, which is giving you some perspective as to how I started my company, what we do and all that stuff. But then sort of landing with, like, how do you do that? Like, how do people start a startup? Which, again, I would say, what year is this, 2022? 8 years ago, I would have not been able to answer that question for you. I grew up on the south side of Chicago at a time when most of the young people in my area, especially the young men, there was a stat at the time that was most of the young men in my area were either out of work, so unemployed, or out of school. So 40% of young men between the ages of 18 and 35. They all were, for the most part, Black American young men. And so that very much so shaped not just my upbringing, but also my outlook. And so I left Chicago in 2013 or so with the idea that wherever I was going to go, I plan on coming back to change it for the better. And so my initial thought was like, hey, I'll go run for office or something like that. And I went to Columbia University in New York, studied political science. My first job was actually working for New York City Council. And honestly, I started there because though I enjoyed the work, I enjoyed the people I was working with, I left that experience feeling, this might not be the best forum for me. So then the next summer, I worked for the City of Chicago, Department of Innovation and Technology. Again, I had a political science background. So I was writing policy proposals on net neutrality, talking about how the Federal Communications Commission could do a better job using net neutrality policies to serve low-income and small business owners, low-income communities and small business owners in Chicago. And so I was doing that work. I was happy, not necessarily fulfilled, but I said, okay, I'm sort of on the path. I know I want to go to law school, all this stuff. But something still just didn't ring true for me. It felt very removed from helping people, which is where I came from. My grandparents were both Chicago public schools teachers for over 35 years. My mother, I grew up volunteering with my mom in church and helping young people. That just was how I was raised. So the policy stuff was great. I just felt it was a little bit too far removed from the outcomes that I was trying to create. So I'm giving you this context because I was still very much so, well, this is what I've got to do. If I want to go to law school, I've got to stay on this tried and true path. And that summer, I was working with the commissioner of the department. And the whole summer, she kept saying, you got to meet Phil. You got to meet Phil. You got to meet Phil. And I'm like, who's Phil? Why do I have to meet Phil? And I'll tell you the truth, that in my head, Phil, who I had been told had started a company, sold that company to ComEd, which is our regional electricity provider, had sold it to ComEd for some undisclosed amount. In my head, okay, well, that's great for Phil, but I'm thinking Phil is a 6'3" white guy. I knew he had gone to Princeton and did an MBA at University of Chicago. I said, okay, that's great. I'd love to meet him. I'm sure he has an interesting story. And the whole summer, I kept missing Phil. Never got a chance. You got to meet Phil. You got to meet Phil. Every time Phil was in the office, I'd be out of the office, that kind of thing. And my last week of my internship, they said, Riley, Phil's here. I don't care what you're doing. You're going to sit down with him. I said, okay, sure. I'm sitting there, and Phil walks in. Phil looks like me. And it was one of the most interesting moments where I was like, my conception of what an entrepreneur up to that point, again, growing up where I grew up, not having been exposed to it, was a person without a job. That was what I was told an entrepreneur was. Someone who had this idea, maybe wanted to spend time on it, but they weren't really doing much of anything. And Phil flipped that entire notion on its head for me, and I've been an entrepreneur ever since. So the day I met Phil, he took me to Chicago's regional incubator and co-working space called 1863, which was the year of the Chicago fire. So I was able to go there, or rather 1871, sorry. I was able to go to 1871, and I was able to meet all of these entrepreneurs. And I'm walking around the co-working space with folks, and they're saying, oh, you're with Phil. You're in good company. You don't have anything I have to say, Phil's going to tell you. Phil's the guy. Phil's the man. And so I got to meet Phil. And again, I tell you, he had started this company, which was an electrical engineering company, which is what his background was, sold it to ComEd. And I said, well, what made you start? He said, oh, I just saw a problem that I wanted to solve, and I tried to fix it. And I thought I could fix it. Then he was able to do that. Phil then transitioned to being the vice president of an organization called World Business Chicago, which was focused on building up business in Chicago, but Phil was their startup guy. So the person he worked for was a guy named J.B. Pritzker, who is now the governor of Illinois. And so Phil was working directly with J.B. to grow the startup community in Chicago. And that, for me, again, changed not just my perception of entrepreneurship, but the trajectory of my own experience in entrepreneurship. So I left that experience that summer saying, I don't know what I want to start, but I want to start something. I want to be a founder. I want to be in a startup. I want to learn what that means, right? And so I was able to do that in the fall of 2014. I went to a conference called Block, which was mostly focused on connecting Black college students to professional opportunities. And I was a Black college student that needed professional opportunities. But I say to say, I went there really just because I thought it was a cool idea. I said, hey, this is great. They had maybe 50 or 60 students from the surrounding areas. And I went to the conference and I made some great friends and that kind of thing. It was great. But I left there and I said, nah, I want to do something bigger and better here. And so I left that conference saying, I want to help plan the next one. And so I went up to the founder of the conference, a woman named Amina Yamusa, and I said, Amina, you don't know me, but I came here for the conference. She said, yeah, I've seen you, meeting people. I said, yeah, I really like this idea. I want to help you bring it to New York City. I go to school in New York. I want to help you grow this idea. So she was like, okay, sure. Which in retrospect is not usually how this goes. But that's what happened. And so we started planning the next conference maybe 2 or 3 months after that one. And that conference turned into a business idea focused on getting, at that time, mostly Black students into technology careers, because a lot of the big tech companies, Apple, Google, AOL, Lyft, et cetera, were releasing their diversity statistics. And they were saying, oh, we've only got 1% of our employee base that is Black. And we said, that's unacceptable, right? Like this idea of not being able to find someone and that sort of thing just wasn't going to cut it. And so we set out to really try to solve that problem. And so what we did was we threw another conference that fall in 2015. We got funding from Princeton University, which is where Amina had gone. And we threw a conference in 2015, randomly, ironically, at NYU Law, which I ended up going to 2 or 3 years later. And we had 500 students. And they weren't just from the surrounding areas. They were from California. They were from Massachusetts. They were from New Jersey. They were from Arkansas. They were from Louisiana. We had students come from all over the country. And it was in that experience where I was really trying to not only provide them with opportunity, but provide them with perspectives on their own careers, that I thought, wow, this can be powerful, right? Like this entrepreneurship thing, this idea of like, not just sort of showing up somewhere and supporting it and that sort of thing, but also taking ownership and crafting a program and an idea and sort of running with it could be really, really, really powerful. And so that's how I got into entrepreneurship, honestly. I did that in 2015. And we ran that program for about 2 more years. And we started to say, well, if we're doing this sort of manually, right? Like we're talking to folks and we're sending the emails and that kind of thing. Maybe we can build a tech platform to do all of this stuff for us. And so you've probably heard of companies like Jockwell that do sort of direct placements. We did another side of that, which was much more around the career support. So interview preparation, resume preparation. We would use technology, particularly AI, machine learning technology, to say, hey, if you give us a job description for a job you're trying to apply for, we can give you some keywords in terms of what you should be looking for, in terms of what you should be putting in a resume and what those companies might be looking for. So really, we took the idea of career preparation and turned it on its head and made it less about the job, the sort of employer, and more about the job seeker, which was not really the frame of mind that most folks were in when we started Sector. And I guess if I had to sort of catalog some of the experiences we've had since then, Lakeisha mentioned we were named to Forbes 30 and all that kind of stuff. We also planned an event with the White House initiative with the Chief Technology Officer of the White House in 2016, called the White House Initiative on Youth Inclusive Entrepreneurship, which was really focused not just on sort of diversity in terms of people of color, but also letting people know that young people, right, like people who don't think of themselves as having much experience, are also agents of change and can be agents of change. And so we started there, and it's been a wild ride since. I recently finished a stint teaching at UNC Chapel Hill, teaching social entrepreneurship. I taught a course called Social Equity and Entrepreneurship. And sort of the fundamental value that I started with, which is I fundamentally believe as a social entrepreneur that entrepreneurship is inherently social, right? Starting a business is not a neutral endeavor because it requires resources, it requires capital, it requires you to work with people. And the idea here is that whatever business you start is either going to have a socially positive impact or socially negative impact, right? Like you think about companies who don't really think about their impact on the climate or don't think about their impact on the communities that they work with. My philosophy is all entrepreneurship is social. And that if you're a thoughtful entrepreneur, you're really always thinking about how do I make it more socially impactful, right? Like more socially positive. And I also don't think you can separate those two things, right? Like the social and the entrepreneurship, they go together. You can't have one without the other. You can't have an organization that's doing good but doesn't have a sort of framework for sustainability, nor can you have an organization that's great at sustainability, making a ton of money, but that is again truly neutral or not thoughtful about how it might be impacting the communities that it touches. So I guess turning the question back to you all in terms of, what does it look like to become an entrepreneur? What does it look like to become a social entrepreneur? What are the things that I need to be thinking about if I really want to become an entrepreneur or start a startup, so to speak? I would say the first thing I would do, this is what I tend to, for people who don't have exposure to entrepreneurship, the first place I send people is to the business model canvas. And if you haven't heard of that tool, it's very accessible. You can Google it and find it. But that tool provides a very basic framework to help you understand not just sort of the what to do, but the why you do it. And I think entrepreneurship, you get to a point where it's much less about sort of what you know or who you know. It's a lot about instinct, right? It's about cultivating and sharpening your own instincts for success in entrepreneurship. And one of my favorite sort of aspects of that business model canvas is about resources, which is an interesting question because when we talk about entrepreneurship, a lot of people say, I want to start this because I think it'll be a great idea. And then you start to say, well, who wants that? And then the other question is what is it going to take to get it? And when you start talking about what it takes to get it, that's resource question, right? Like, is it going to take technical talent? Is it going to take a specific type of expertise? How much does that do you have to pay for that expertise? Do you have the expertise? When you start to get in those kinds of questions, you get in the weeds of what it takes to be an entrepreneur. I think that is sort of where I have personally thrived, both as an entrepreneur, but also as a coach and also as an advisor to startup companies that I work with. I don't know, Lakeisha, if we can take questions from the audience at all.
Oh yeah, I could definitely share some, Riley. I'm so excited to hear everything that you shared. And Riley, this morning, our youth were preparing their final hackathon pitches, and they will be pitching in front of some of the Under Armour innovation team. So what we're doing here at Wearable Tech Ventures is revolutionary from the standpoint of not only developing future and we might as well say current because some of them really could get started right now, future tech entrepreneurs, but also providing them in this education in this niche space where there's tremendous opportunity for us to change the trajectory of the tech diversity narrative, right? Because far too often we keep repeating the same statistics about funding and about those that are lasting in this particular space. And ultimately, what we hope or what we see as the vision for Wearable Tech Ventures is for this to not only be the reigning ecosystem dedicated to developing and promoting wearable technology, but also the space where companies go to if they want to recruit those with specific technical skills, or if they're looking for consultants to help them build out specific initiatives. And then also, with our startups, with making sure that of course, that's going to be first with our startups, with making sure that they're funding and or assisting with licensing or helping to bring those products to the marketplace. And I love what you said about making sure you understand that why, because that's going to be important, because this journey has not been easy. I'm sure yours wasn't, on, skating me either. But I think with both of us being in the space, we're working to make sure that it's better for the next round of folks so that they don't have to go through everything that we went through. I do want to ask you a couple of things, coach to coach, when we're talking about resources, right? Because that's a big thing. We just posted a video yesterday that we actually did a year ago with some of our Wearable roundtable members from some of the banks, and we were talking about resources. What's your viewpoint of resources that are available, and how can our folks take advantage of that? And the reason I say that is because, of course, we know after the murder of George Floyd, there were a number of pledges from corporations to, give money to organizations, and a lot of that was never done. And even in this space, knowing what we're doing, we know that a lot of people could do a lot better, right? just putting it bluntly. So from where you sit, and especially if I could just put it out there, just be plain, Riley, we know that some of the strongest networks for entrepreneurs, of course, have come from the Ivy League realm. Let's just be blunt with it. So how is your view of resources? Is it different, or is it similar to, what everybody else is experiencing as they are not only starting, but growing their startups and or ecosystems for sustainability?
That's a great point. I often tell folks, I have titles, right? Director of venture. Oh, that's the title. If I had a sort of what I do every day, I'm a relationship builder by profession. And a short answer, I would say, my outlook in terms of how I can attract resources or get in touch with resources is slightly different. To your point, given where I went to school and all that kind of stuff, I was very intentional about that. I wouldn't say at the undergrad level because I didn't really know what I was doing, but definitely as I thought about law school and all the other graduate school. But I will say that I did sort of not luck out, but there was some level of foresight in terms of being able to go to a place like Columbia, which, to be clear, I mean, has its own history of racial inequality and shutting out Black students and alumni like that. Like, I know that back and forth. But to your point, even in that community, building, sort of being a leader in that community has offered me access to friends. Like, my first client, for example, was a Columbia alumni who happened to be a very good friend of mine. Right, our first and biggest and currently still biggest client. All right. It also gave me a level of credibility that I may or may not have earned, right? Like, just being truthful about it, right? Like, there's a level of like, oh, you went to this kind of school and people sort of put you in high esteem even if you didn't earn it. I happen to think I did, but you know what I mean? Like, it's not something that, it's something that people sort of see before they see me. Mm-hmm. And then I would say, so then the other question is like, okay, so what about people who didn't go to Ivy League school? So I have a twin brother. My twin brother went to HBCU, Alabama State University. And now you actually have some growing communities of HBCU entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. Hadia Mujib's HBCU VC, love Hadia, love HBCU VC. They're doing great stuff. Even to your point, in the D9, you've got a lot of the fraternities and sororities that are doing pitch competitions and doing other types of entrepreneurship support. So I would say whenever I teach a LinkedIn workshop from time to time. I say start with what you have access to, right? Like it can be as simple as like, oh, we're from the same hometown. It can be as simple as I like to play basketball, you like to play basketball, we play basketball every week. Be creative about how and where you build relationships, because the other thing about entrepreneurship is you just literally never know where support can come from, because it might not be the people you know, it might be who they know.
Exactly. And I'm so glad that you mentioned all the other communities that are here. And one of the most important things I want to share with people here is do not put limits on yourself. We are in a time where social media alone has changed the game on how people are reaching their customers and reaching other influencers. And so now is the time. So if you're listening and you're saying, oh, I never went to school or I didn't finish school, no excuse. Just listen to our podcast, Wearable Takeover. And we have stories of people that overcame odds and raised multi-million dollars. Like, you can do this. Now, we're not saying it's totally easy. There's some grit that's involved. What can you say to that, from the aspect of grit?
Yeah, I would say entrepreneurship will try and test you. And you need a level of, there's the tenacity to go get stuff done, but then there's the grit. Grit comes in when it doesn't go like you plan. A great example is on our first conference that we did. So when not the one that I went to, the second one we did, which we call Block, we had to house something like 200 students in New York City. And we had promised a lot of these people housing. My job for the most part was around connecting folks to getting corporate sponsorship. That was my job. But we had a team member whose entire job was focused on connecting with people to help them get jobs, to help them get housing for the conference. And that person did not do their job. Did not. When I say did not, I mean a week before the conference, we had spots for 2 people, and we had to house 200. And it was my job, or at least I took it upon myself, to try and figure out what we were going to do. And grit is, I stayed up all night for the next 8 days making phone calls. Hey, can you house this person? Hey, can you house this person? And we got everybody situated. But that was a big deal. Yeah. And to think about, so not only there was 2 levels to it, right? Like the first level was like, what happens if this doesn't go? If we don't figure this out, that's my reputation. And I just wasn't going to let that happen. That's just not how I was raised. The second piece of it was, well, I got it done. Conference went well, and I want to do this again. What is that? That's weird.
Do I want to?
Yeah. So I'd say grit is, and truthfully, right? Like a lot of our community, we have grit. We know, we know what that is. We have examples of it. I don't think we're short on that. I think what we often don't do is figure out how to apply it from one situation to the next, or different contexts. And that's where I think investing in our own community's entrepreneurship, that's why I think it makes sense, because we have some of the sort of embedded skills just because of our culture and that sort of thing.
Yes, the rate of survival, really. I'm going to ask you 2 more questions before we close. And one is in regard to, what we've been hosting this week, Tech Remixed, which is a virtual hackathon. And because we had over 200 participants, we qualified to say we are the world's largest wearable tech focused hackathon. So we were able to do that this week based off of the registrants. So what we've learned is that the digital divide is much more expansive than what many people reference it as, meaning a lot of times when we hear that digital divide, we're talking about people that may not have access to the internet and or resources. What I've come to learn on this journey is that there's a greater digital divide between those that have been classically trained, if you can, in tech versus that of the startup world. And it's like speaking 3 or 4 different languages. So this hackathon environment brings everyone together. What are some tips that you can provide? This is the first question. What are some tips that you can provide for our community who, 1, has never heard of a hackathon, 2, just signed up? How can they take full advantage of everything we've been offering? Because we've been offering free tech skills. They were able to learn how to code. They were able to learn how to build apps, build chat bots. I mean, they could paint with Bob Ross. And I don't know if everybody took advantage of all that stuff, Riley.
Gotcha. I would say because I did, when I was younger, I did some of very similar things in terms of going to tech workshops and that sort of thing. But to your point, it sometimes doesn't feel real. It feels like it's in a silo. What I would say is be proactive about sharing that knowledge with your peers, and also sort of going to people who are maybe you want to be your mentors or want to be sort of your role models, and saying, hey, I learned this, I know you do something else, like what do you think? And sort of being able to like put it in conversation with something that you actually have a reference point for. That's what usually makes it sticky. And I think for our community, that's really what we do.
Absolutely. The last question I had before we sign off, and thank you so much for being generous, because I know you've been going back and forth, a really busy guy. But for those that may have an entrepreneur in their family or may have an entrepreneur as a friend, what advice can you give to those people that may not be entrepreneurial minded? How can they support those entrepreneurs in their lives? Or should they?
Should they? That's a good question. I would say, honestly, the first step is like, ask people what they do. Like, just ask them to tell you about what they're working on, why they care about it. I think as an entrepreneur, it can be pretty lonely if you're a founder, especially. Like, it's just hard. So to know someone even cares what you're working on is always really special. And then, if you see an alignment, speak their name up when they're not there. I can't tell you how many times friends have said, oh, I heard my, friend is doing this, or my job is doing this. Have you thought about partnering with them? That goes such a long way. If you think, if it's something that you feel like you have a good grasp on, like I think there's a pressure sometimes to like, push people out there and that sort of thing. But, if you have a good grasp on it, if you feel like you understand them, if you feel like they'll do the job that you want them to do, I say go for it. I say promote them. I think that's a big thing.
Absolutely. And I have to thank Julian Turley. Thank you. Because Julian spoke up my name when I wasn't around to you so that we could have this introduction. And especially now that you're in the DMV, but just also echoing that. So, if you have an entrepreneur in your life, that doesn't mean you have to buy their stuff. If you feel inclined, you could do that. But sometimes just a word of encouragement goes so far. And one thing that I started to implement, and this might be kind of cool. You might use this, Riley. I reminded myself to water my flowers every morning. And so what that means is the people that make life beautiful, make sure that I'm pouring into them some sort of substance, whether it be encouragement, a smile or something. Water the flowers that are around you every morning. So with that said, Riley, how can our folks stay in touch with you?
Feel free to shoot me an email. My email is Riley, RILEY, at joinsector.com. That's JOINSECTOR.com. Or find me on LinkedIn. I'm always there.
Absolutely. This is First Fam, people. And of course, you can always stay in tune with wearabletechventures.org. I'm Lakeisha Greenwade at Lakeisha Greenwade. You can find me on Instagram or LinkedIn. Riley, hang on as we sign off to our folks. But thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully you'll stay tuned for the closing ceremony tomorrow. It's going to be absolutely amazing. And thank you to all of our partners, all of our sponsors, all of our volunteers, our teachers. We could not have done this without you. It takes a lot of work to have this vision and to pour into everyone else. So thank you so much. And hopefully we'll see you tomorrow or on our site, wearabletechventures.org.